So, you know it's going to be something special when I receive not just one, not just two, not just three, but 4 packages stamped with SkyWatcher on them. You know it's going to be good. Now, what do those packages contain? They contain the SkyWatcher WAVE 150i harmonic drive mount or strain wave gear mount, which is basically SkyWatcher's answer to the ZW-AM5, AM5N, the Warp Astron WD-20, which is under this cover, and other harmonic drive mounts or strain wave gear mounts that are on the market. If you don't understand what I'm saying, basically you just need to understand that in astrophotography, when you want to take pictures, you need to keep track of the stars. As the Earth rotates, from our point of view, it looks like the stars move around us, and we need to be able to counter that movement. A mount typically is pointed towards the north celestial pole or south celestial pole if you're upside down, and therefore just using one axis of rotation, it's able to counter the rotation of the Earth very effectively. And the traditional mount has been called a GEM or German equatorial mount, where you have a system where you have the scope on one side, a big counterweight on the other side, and then they work as a pair basically, just like the counterweight for an elevator, for instance. With harmonic drives or strain wave gears, suddenly the gears have much more power than the German equatorial mount gears do, which rely on a worm gear type of mechanism, and so we can make do without any counterweight, and we can get a much more compact package, much more compact light mount that can still support an incredibly high payload while still tracking the stars quite well, assuming you're doing something called auto-guiding, which becomes a must with such drive mounts. Anyway, let's go into the packages and see exactly what I received into each of those boxes, because I don't know what I got. Oh, and by the way, I received this from SkyWatcher directly. I contacted them after one of my viewers told me, actually many of my viewers told me they wanted me to review this mount, so I'm doing it now. And they're providing this mount free of charge. Of course, at the end of the review period, I will have to send it back to them. All of my opinions in this video are my own. I'm not getting paid or anything like that to do this review. With that, in the first box, I have an extension pier. This is simply so that I can have a long telescope on top of my mount, and I can slew it around across multiple targets in the sky without risking for the bottom of that telescope to hit my tripod. It also comes with instructions on how to mount it. The second box contains counterweight bars, which I told them I absolutely did not need because I don't really have any scopes that is heavy enough to justify such things. And it does seem that it also comes with another box inside for counterweights. And yes, indeed, it contained what appears to be a 5-kilogram counterweight. Not sure if I'm going to use it. I mean, it looks like we have the either a very short counterweight shaft or more likely an extension counterweight shaft with the main pretty beefy counterweight shaft, and then the counterweight here. In the next package, I see a carbon tripod. It's extremely light and it looks pretty solid. We'll test it out in a moment. It also came with what appears to be a spacer of some kind, together with some hex wrenches and a tripod spreader, always good to have for stability in our astrophotography pursuits. Also came with an instruction manual. And then in the final box, we get another box, a nice case for our little mount. And this time we get a notice saying that they did not want to print the notice for low carbon environmental protection. So yeah, but I'm gonna keep you waiting for a moment there because I'm a sadist like that. We get a cigar plug adapter. I haven't seen one of those in ages, so that's good to see. We also get a USB cable for controlling the mount, and I'm having a lot of trouble getting the mount out of its case. Okay, I think that's the end of the review. I'm not able to get the mount out of the case. Give me a moment. Okay, I finally got it out. It's really a tight fit, and this is the mount that we get. It is the SkyWatcher WAVE 150i, supports Wi-Fi connectivity as we expect these days. And we can also see that we have a whole control panel at the bottom where we have the main USB to control the mount. We also have a plug for the hand controller, which didn't come with the mount. We have the power input for the mount of 12 volts. And then we also have a power to the hub. And it's the hub that is actually on the declination saddle. We also have a USB for the USB hub of the mount. And when we look on the declination saddle, we can see that indeed we have two power outs, each is 12 volts. And we also have a guide port and a USB port that is in blue, so it makes me hope for USB 3.0. Anyway, with that, I can put everything together and show you how it looks like once it's all in one piece. Okay, and we're now actually a couple of nights later because I've been testing this after putting it on its tripod, on its pier, etc. And now we can go a bit more into the details of this mount. First, this mount is massive. It is far bigger than the ZW-AM5N here. And in terms of volume occupied by the mount, it manages to be larger than the WD-20 here that can support more weight without counterweights. And so on that topic, I want to go a bit more into the specs as well as what you get when you buy the mount versus the optional accessories and what are the specs of the mount itself. So first, the mount head. We can see it is fairly massive. It gives a feeling of confidence really when you hold it and when you put a telescope on top of it. And it weighs 5.8 kilograms. It also is rated without counterweight for 15 kilograms, which is the same as the ZW-AM5N. And it's also rated with counterweights to up to 25 kilograms, which is, I believe, 3 kilograms more than its closest competitor, the AM5N by ZW again. That said, the mount head only, when you buy it, it's just the mount head. It's just what you see like my hands on right now. You do not get the counterweight shaft, you don't get the pier, you don't get the tripod, you just get the mount head itself, which makes sense. It is the same for competitors as well. The mount head itself is $2,200 US. This is compared to $2,000 for the ZW-AM5N. So we're paying a premium over the AM5N. So we'll have to figure out what we get in addition compared to the AM5N. And so that's just the mount head itself. The pier is $165 US, and then you add the carbon fiber, tripod at the bottom, and that is $375 US. So let's assume that you get just the mount head with its matching tripod. You're already at $2,570 US basically. So that is more than the ZW-AM5N, which is something like $2,200 or $2,300 with its TC40 carbon fiber tripod. Additionally to that, the counterweight shaft and counterweight, as well as the counterweight, its extension shaft, for the mount costs $110 US. So that's the whole deal here. The mount, the pier, the tripod, the counterweight and counterweight bar. That's all of the accessories. Now I want to focus on the mount itself. So there's a few very interesting things about it. One thing to note here is that this front plate can actually be unscrewed, and inside we have direct access to the brains of the mount. And it seems it should be fairly easy to remove all of that stuff. So that's plus points for repairability of the mount. It's very interesting to see such a design. Otherwise, we have some classic stuff like the azimuth and altitude adjustment knobs, as well as locking knobs for the altitude on both sides of the mount. So that's very standard. The altitude itself does require those locking knobs. I mean, you can leave them unlocked, it's fine. And when I did polar alignment with those locking knobs, when closing them down, I basically budged the polar alignment by just 10 arc seconds. So almost no impact, and that's a very good thing. Now talking about those knobs on the side, those are the altitude adjustment knobs. They're tension-based, so very similar to the AM5N. They're extremely tensioned. So at first it was actually a struggle to turn them, and I was a bit panicky about those knobs, like can I actually use them to do polar alignment? But in the end, once I got concentrated, it works. It's just I would have preferred a better grip due to the insane tension that there is on those knobs. But I was able to get very, very precise polar alignment with this polar alignment routine, so that was fine in the end. So that's the standard stuff. Standard stuff is also Wi-Fi. We can connect to it via the SynScan app, and I'll show you that in a moment. Now, stuff that we don't really see in other strain wave gear mounts is quality of light stuff. So you can see here, there's this little red bulge here this is an LED, and it will light up the bubble level. By the way, for me the bubble level is absolutely not level because, quick reminder, it doesn't matter once you are polar aligned. The scale here for the latitude is also illuminated by this LED, so you can see it in the darkness and you can control that within the app. So that's a cool little quality of life feature. Then we go into this panel, which I've already mentioned. We have the main USB to basically connect the mount to the PC and to control the mount. We can also control the mount via Wi-Fi. I decided not to do that because I don't trust wireless connectivity for guiding. And then we have the power to the mount. This is this cable here. And we have the power to the hub on the declination part of mount, and this uses actually a 2.5 millimeters internal diameter DC port compared to 2.1 millimeters for the power here. And I haven't used the USB hub, even though it is USB 3.0, so you have a computer dangling, then you're using a laptop, you can just plug it in there. And then on the declination saddle, we have a USB output as well as power out. And the power out is again 2.5 millimeters internal, like the inside metal nub in the middle is 2.5 millimeters. And I didn't have actually many cables with that size, so I have only a single cable for me that goes to my computer here, and then the computer uses standard 2.1 millimeter core cable to power the camera. And another thing that I thought was very, very good about this configuration is that this panel here, where you can plug in your computer and get the USB hub on the declination axis, where you can plug in your power, and same thing, you can get it on the declination axis, and where you can plug in your mount, both for USB control and for power, as well as the power button. This is static. This instrument panel never moves when you slew the mount. So that's a big quality of life feature. You'll never have cables basically unplugged because the mount moved around. This isn't the case for a ZW-AM5N, where this panel here will move with RA rotation. It doesn't move a lot, but it does move. Another thing about the declination saddle, it supports both Vixen plate and Losmandy plates, so that's what I have here. It is a bit on the short side, and also you can see that if you have a dovetail plate that is quite long, it can actually interfere with your power cables to the mount and to the USB hub here for the power out. So if you use this mount, it's better to have bent cables like this USB cable that came with it, and maybe like you would want to buy like DC cables, both 2.5 millimeters inside and 2.1 millimeters that are bent so that you don't run into this issue. With this particular scope, I'm unable to really balance it in declination because of those cables. Okay, and now we have this mystery knob here, and these two mystery knobs there that I want to touch upon. So let's start with this green mystery knob here. Let me unfasten it, and you need to unfasten it like a lot, almost as if you wanted to completely remove it from the mount. And then what's going to happen is I can do this. I can move the telescope freely, and it's very smooth, so I can actually balance the telescope. And that's what I've done. I've balanced the telescope in RA very easily. And there's blocks. Here, it cannot go further than that in the direction that points towards the camera. I cannot go further. And same thing, if I go the opposite side, it will actually, if I didn't have the scope on, it would let me go all the way to the vertical, but not more than that. So it can only rotate 180 degrees. And obviously, after you've done your balancing, you do not want to forget to lock that. Because otherwise, you could be in a world of pain. So what is the point? This is a strain wave gear mount. Why would we want to balance it like that? There's several points that are mentioned by SkyWatcher on their website. There's basically the fact that you can lower the power consumption by having your telescope and counterweight balancing each other. And I verified that as true in the 2 nights that I've used it. The first night I had the counterweight bar, I used roughly 50% of my battery power here from Apertura. On the following night, I completely removed the counterweight, and this time I used 75% of the battery. Now, the better test for me would be to have a power meter in between the mount and the battery or something like that. I don't currently have that, but I could see the actual power that it would draw when it is just tracking an object with and without counterweight. But at least there is some evidence to show that this is indeed the case, and it makes sense, right? The mount has less to work against when there is a counterweight. But it's not definitive evidence. Another thing was, with the counterweight, you may get better tracking of the mount. And with this setup, I have tested the tracking with and without counterweights, and we'll look at the difference between the two later in the video, so make sure to stay tuned. Now, we also actually can balance the declination, because those two screws here, the two black screws at the base of the declination axis, they can also be completely removed, basically. Here they are, completely removed, and I can move the mount a little bit. There are hard locks pretty quickly, but that is enough to balance your telescope in declination. For me, if I wanted to really balance the scope, I would need to move it downwards, but it is blocked by my power cables here, so it's not an option for me. Okay, and I've placed back the bolts in there. So this is really what you get in terms of convenience compared to something like a ZW AM5 mount, which is, I would say, again, its biggest competitor. You get a slightly higher payload of 25 kilograms with the counterweight bar kit and the counterweight. You get the ability to balance your telescope both in right ascension and declination, and you get a very complete power delivery and USB delivery solution on the declination saddle with 12 volt, 5 amps rated for the two ports taken together, which should be enough to power your equipment. You also get, in terms of a quality of life feature, the fixed panel for your cables. And I think that's probably the biggest thing for me, having that fixed panel. It really removes a source of worry for me. Now, I thought it's very interesting for SkyWatcher going with the ability to balance your telescope for a strain wave gear mount. It seems to be aimed at people who will carry this mount around with the counterweight kit by car to go someplace, and then they only have a battery or their car battery to repower the mount, and they want to lower the power consumption. They want to have a more traditional approach to strain wave gear mounts, or they want to address people who put those strain wave gear mounts on their balcony or in their obsi and they never touch them again, like me. So I thought it was quite interesting. I will say a little point of frustration is this little lever here that basically locks in place the plate at the top of the pier, and also at the tripod level if you're just using the tripod. That little thing conflicts with this base here, so you need to place it at the right spot, and that kind of restricts your rotation options. I mean, it doesn't really do so, but you have to pass an IQ test while you're placing the mount to make sure that it is above one of the tripod legs or on the north pointing end of the mount. So now, when you have the mount set up, because it doesn't come with a hand controller, how do you control this mount? And that is something, again, that is pretty interesting with SkyWatcher mounts. Let's start with the app. You get the SynScan app, and you can connect to the mount using the connect button. The first time you connect to it, you'll have to use the internal mount Wi-Fi. It exposes its own hotspot. You just connect to it, and then you have access to it. After that, I actually set it up so that it connects to my home Wi-Fi, and now, without being connected directly to the mount, just connected to my home Wi-Fi, I'm able to connect to the mount directly. And here I am on the mount itself. If you want to do that, it's under SynScan Wi-Fi, and you can see you have the station mode here at the bottom where I have set up my home Wi-Fi SSID. Then you have the usual stuff. You can change the speed of the slew of the mount. You can slew the mount around. And overall, it's fairly silent. I mean, you can hear it, but it's very acceptable. I kind of like the sound that it makes when it slews, but that's obviously not a big deal when you're going to choose a mount. You can also set your altitude limits, and that's actually super important to set it, because by default, the upper go-to limit is 75 degrees. You want to make sure to put it at 90 degrees, unless you have some obstacles like your tripod or whatever, and your scope could hit that if it's pointed straight overhead. But just make sure that you have it at 90 degrees here. You can also go in the advanced tab, change the guiding rates, change the amount of degrees that the mount is allowed to go beyond the meridian, that kind of stuff. So you can set everything in there. And you have the usual stuff like 2 nights best, and there it is, it's done. So you have access to all of those features there from the usual SkyWatcher stuff. So if you're a SkyWatcher user and you don't want to go all the way to ZW, it's a mount that I think would make absolute sense for you to use instead of something like an AM5N mount. And if you were to tell it to go to some object in the sky, I could say okay, go to Andromeda Galaxy. There it goes to Andromeda Galaxy. It doesn't ask me questions because it is in the sky right now. And there we are. It's actually, I was surprised as well by how well the go-to worked. And when I had to recenter the target using plate solving, it was usually just one refinement. No need for more than that. It was very precise. So that was pretty nice, but it's something that is more or less expected with this class of mounts at this price. From the PC, if you're having a SkyWatcher mount, you can have basically 3 ways of connecting to the mount. All of them work over Wi-Fi or over USB. You have the official SkyWatcher SceneScan ASCOM driver, which I've never used in my life. You have the very classic EQ mod driver, which can work over USB, I believe also Wi-Fi, but I'm not completely sure. And then you have Green Swamp server, which is what I use. It's the most modern one, and it works really well. I've featured it on this channel before. I'll put a link to that video down in the description. And of course, all of the links to everything, to the mount, to the pier, to the tripod, to the counterweights kit, etc. will be all in the description if you're interested. But that is also one of the unique points of SkyWatcher mounts compared to other brands. The ability to choose your own ASCOM driver based on what it does. And there's a lot of people that have been using the EQ mod driver. There's also a lot of people, but fewer, that have been using Green Swamp server. So there's a lot of help that's available to you on various forums of astrophotography if you're using SkyWatcher mounts. But then the same can be said of ZWO mounts as well. Still, it's another area that if you're used to SkyWatcher and you just want to have your mount plug and play, just do that. And I was actually super surprised and very pleasantly surprised that to me it was absolutely, completely painless. I had Green Swamp server already installed on the PC because I've used it in the past, and I just basically pressed connect and everything worked. So that was kind of pleasant, plug and play, because I had this installed and used with another SkyWatcher mount in the past. Okay, now we need to go and look at the tracking results, at the guiding calibration results, at the guiding assistant results in PhD2. So for that, we need to go inside and have a look. So before we go inside though, if you like this kind of in-depth review, because it's a lot of work and you want to encourage me, you can click that like button. It takes a second, it really helps out. You can also leave a comment down below. What do you think of this mount? Is it just overpriced when you can get the ZWO AM5N? Or do you see the merits of having those quality of life features that I've mentioned about the mount? And is that something that you would consider buying for yourself? Also, if you're new to the channel and you like this kind of in-depth review, and also I do educational videos on astrophotography, you may consider to subscribe, in which case, welcome to the channel. And if you want to sponsor this channel directly to make those videos possible, you can join the channel as a member. This is the join button next to the subscribe button, or you can join my Patreon as a paid supporter. I have the link down in the description. My channel members, my Patreon supporters, you make this channel possible. I would no longer be making videos without you. Thank you so much for your support. And if you want to help at no cost to you and you're planning on buying anything from Amazon, Agena, High Point Scientific, etc., if you do so after clicking the links that I have down in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. So many ways to help, and thank you so much for your support. Okay, let's get inside and look at the results of this mount. Okay, so let's first look quickly at the software that I was using to control the mount. This is Green Swamp server, one of the 3 that are available. You have the official SceneScan software and ASCOM driver. You have Green Swamp server, my personal preference once you're used to it. And then there's of course the venerable EQ mod. And when you connect to the mount via USB, you just need to select the right COM port, and the baud rate should be 115 to 100, right? This should be it. By default, it's 9800, and that will not work. You can also connect to it via Wi-Fi. It's a lot of possibilities there, and you can also change the guide rate, all this kind of good stuff in there, and then the usual controls. But basically from Nina, you just connect to Green Swamp server, and that's it. You control it as usual. I've had no issues whatsoever. And of course, with Green Swamp server, you get this cool little 3D view of where the telescope is pointed, how it's looking like, that kind of stuff. Always good to have. And I did not have any issue, including the meridian flip just worked as is expected for a SkyWatcher mount. As usual, it's basically plug and play if you're already a SkyWatcher user. I also have the results of the guiding assistant. Of course, I was using an off-axis guider, so we were at a focal length of 580 millimeters. And you can see I had a very good polar alignment error based on the drift alignment across 15 minutes of measurement with the guiding assistant. All of this, it's just simply very typical for this kind of strain wave gear mount. There is nothing surprising there. The declination backlash was also exactly as I expected. It's basically the same as other strain wave gear mounts that I've seen, except things with like direct drive like the WD-20 that had basically no declination backlash that I could see. Now, when I did all of that, I was pointed basically right at the celestial meridian. This is where the guiding is the most difficult to do, and I let it run for 10, 15 minutes at a time on that area, and with and without the counterweight, exactly as I promised. And this is like with the counterweight, and you can see we had like 0.5 total arc seconds in guiding. RA, it was 0.41. This was early evening. We did not have any wind yet, although the wind rose like after 30 minutes after I started doing those tests. So then we had like windy tests. So it was interesting to see how the guiding figures became with the wind. But you can see here, no problem whatsoever, 0.5 arc seconds of guiding. It's perfectly good. My own telescope at 580 millimeter of focal length, together with a main imaging sensor using the IMX585 sensor, 2.9 microns, has a pixel scale of 1.03 arc seconds. So we have no issues whatsoever. This is very typical of strain wave gear mounts. And something to be very aware of, by the way, is that Tokyo in winter has very poor atmospheric seeing. So even with multi-star guiding, we may start chasing the seeing. I was seeing very similar results throughout the night on my WD-20 mount that was working next doors, or right next to the SkyWatcher WAVE 150i. So everything as expected, basically. By the way, just to make sure that we did not have any weird high frequency movements of the mount when it was tracking, I took this short video. Sorry, it's through remote desktop, so it's a bit laggy, but you can see there's no issue at all with any like weird jitter that could ruin the image. So all of that looks good. We can also look at the actual guide log for the night when I was using it before I stopped it due to incoming clouds. Here we can see the guiding assistant, the result. You can see the drift in the right ascension versus the time at the top. So across 15 minutes, a drift of 20 arc seconds, effectively, in terms of right ascension with those peaks there. And then we had the guiding for 10 minutes at the meridian, basically. So this is the guiding with counterweights. I got 0.53 arc seconds. And then this is the guiding without counterweight. And now I was getting 0.58 arc seconds, but you can see it seems to be polluted by the very start of the guiding. If I exclude this very start area of the guiding, we still have 0.55 arc seconds. So at least with my relatively light telescope, I did not see any difference in terms of guiding quality between having a counterweight and not having a counterweight. It's possible that we would see a big difference with a heavier setup, but I currently don't have a heavier setup, so I cannot put this mount to the torture test. So this is limitation of my review. If you're wondering how well it does with heavier payloads, unfortunately, I am not able to answer this question right now. And then after the winds had started, unfortunately, this is the type of results that I was getting with 0.74 arc seconds. If I select some areas between dithers, we get 0.7 arc seconds. The Warp Astron WD-20 next door was roughly at 0.65 during that time, sometimes 0.60. So the Warp Astron WD-20 was consistently doing better than the 150i, but then it's not the same price range, and it's also not quite the same tech in terms of the drive mechanism used. And then we have very similar figures throughout the night until the clouds rolled in. 0.75 arc seconds, 0.69 arc seconds. It just behaves pretty well, even in those relatively strong winds that we were having. So, and of course I want to show you some results of long exposures with this mount, so 300 seconds on the Crab Nebula. And we have some samples here. This is with a Newtonian telescope, so you might see some collimation issues. But throughout the night I was looking at this and I saw no issues whatsoever. The stars are nice and round, as much as the collimation allows, and also the seeing allows. I saw pretty much exactly identical stars on the Newtonian that was on my WD-20, taking images of the same target. That was one frame. We can have a look at another frame. Again, I don't see any issues whatsoever. I'm actually happy with all of the details that we are getting in the main nebula. This is actually super cool to see. And if we look at a third frame, all of those like picked at random basically from the frames that I have captured, it looks pretty good. There might be some trailing there, maybe in declination. I don't know, but or could be just the I think it's more the collimation, but we can see maybe an example of a frame that was affected to some extent by the wind that we were having. But I think that we are not seeing really effectively any issues with this mount. It's performing exactly as expected and actually pretty honorably considering all of the wind that we were having. Overall, the 150i seems to be a very solid mount. It has a look that inspires confidence. It can use the standard SkyWatcher, ASCOM drivers, Green Swamp server, EQ mod. It also, of course, works with the ESI Air. It has those balancing features and the knob that you use to free the mount. Actually, you need to really release it a lot to get into that, so I doubt anyone would have an accident with a telescope like bumping into the tripod due to that adjustment, which was my main worry when I first saw a review of this mount by Astro Backyard. But now that I've actually used it, I feel that that's not really a worry. And then you can also do the balancing of the payload effectively on declination axis as well, and this one has stops very quickly, so you cannot have any issues with that either. So it's a cool feature to have on top of the mount, so that you have a more traditional German equatorial mount kind of feeling. How useful that is, I'm not sure. At least when I balanced it, I did see potentially a difference in power consumption, which makes sense, but not really a difference in terms of tracking accuracy of the mount with the guiding. So it worked just as well with or without the counterweight, at least for my payload. But really what I think makes the big difference to me is the design of the through the mount wiring, where you have both a USB port that's available on the declination axis, and you also have two DC outputs for a total of 12 volts, 5 amps that is available, and that's a big thing. And you also have the fact that you have the main connection center to the mount that is static. It does not move. You can slew all around the sky. Those cables, those plugs, they do not move. So that's a really good thing. There is this little issue of spacing in between those plugs and the dovetail plate of your telescope. And I was using the Losmandy style, so I was even higher than a standard Vixen bar would be. So you really need to have bent DC cables if you're going to use that. I didn't have those on hand, so I was using those normal cables. Definitely, if you're using this mount, you will want to have those bent cables. The one provided for USB is definitely bent. In terms of the polar alignment, I was worried about the azimuth adjustment knobs having so much tension. I really had to put strength to move them around, but at the same time, they were extremely precise when I used them. And I usually have the issue of where I overshoot my azimuth and then I need to go back. I didn't really have this issue with that mount because it was so hard to rotate too much that I was rotating in small increments, and it naturally made it easier. But at the same time, I don't think I'd be able to do polar alignment with this mount with gloves on in a super cold weather or super cold nights. I wouldn't want really to do that. So that's both a positive and a negative. The altitude adjustment was really good, and the locking knobs barely made any change to the polar alignment. So that was very, very nice. So all of that, in terms of the mount head itself, is it worth the $200 price premium over something like the ZW AM5N? Well, it depends. It depends on you. It depends on whether those additional quality of life features make a difference to you. There's one I haven't discussed, by the way, which is the altitude adjustment can be done throughout the range. You can go to full alt-az to Singapore polar alignment in a single go. You don't need to change bolts like you would need to with something like the ZW AM5N mount. So again, it's all about like small quality of life improvements that may or may not make the mount valuable to you for those like additional $200 over the AM5N. Otherwise, it seems to perform exactly as expected, pretty much in line with the other strain wave gear mounts that I have, at least in this winter poor seeing in Tokyo. And from the few nights that I've used it, it seems to be a perfectly good mount. No really issues to signal at this stage. It just works. Now the tripod itself, it's good. I didn't have any issues with the tripod. I was actually fairly impressed by how stable it was during that windy night, of whose results I showed you. The pier is a pier. It's just as usual. There's nothing much to signal about it. And the counterweight shaft with the extension can be hugely long, which, yeah, if you have a very heavy payload, you can go all the way to 25 kilograms. And yeah, I believe it. I think it would work pretty fine, but I haven't been able to test it. Overall, let me know, what would you buy? Would you get the AM5N, or would you get the 150i, or would you get a third mystery option? Let me know down in the comments. I think there's always really good discussion down in the comments. So if you're looking for a mount, you're planning on buying something, then yeah, check out the comments to see what other people's opinions are. And while you're going there, please like the video. It really helps the channel out. And if you want to help the channel even more and you're planning on buying anything from Amazon, Agena, High Point Scientific, etc., including this mount or its little brother, the Wave 100i, for instance, if you do so after clicking the links that I have down in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. If you want to help even more, you can become a channel member using the join button next to the subscribe button, or a Patreon supporter. The link is down in the description. Some of my Patreon ranks have access to my videos early and without ads. And of course, everyone gets their name in the credits at the end of long videos. Talking about long videos, this one was a long one. Thank you so much for sticking till the end. This is a statistic that YouTube looks at a lot, so it really helps out. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.